Hare Krishna. So we are discussing about ego. In this section, we'll try to understand the solution part. Now we discussed that the problem in communication becomes more difficult when we feel isolated. The ego craves recognition, it wants to be noticed, to be acknowledged. Now the problem with ego is that it leads us to constantly seek recognition. When we don't get it, we feel frustrated. The child who is ignored, even when they behave well, may start acting out to attract attention. So this we discussed. So ego is desperate in need to be noticed, whether through good or bad behavior. The ego just want to be seen. Like we discussed this how, like children, they suddenly come in front of elders or they cry or do something when they want attention. So eventually we see that this pushes everyone and try to come in front, and we all have this tendency. We want to be seen, we want to stand out, to be number one. So this is the problem of the representative ego, which constantly want to project itself to be noticed. There is a famous law, we discussed this also, Eric Brown, the author of Transaction Analysis, which states that any attention, even negative attention, is better than no attention. So this is how the ego operates. So this also we discuss. It leads to many unfortunate consequences. One of these consequences is that because we want to be number one, we want to become isolated in our own ego shell and seeks ways to stand out. The easiest way to become number one in relation to others, and that is to put everyone else down. And this is the way many people put others down, trying to make themselves seem better. So they try to criticize others. We see some egoistic people always trying to find with others, and in the house they trying to say you are wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. What basically they want to tell that I am the right and I am the better person. So this is, they want to seem better. It's actually common strategy to feel superior, but there is an extreme version of this too, that is violence. Like people tend to become violence, while there is extreme examples, like this is focusing on the cultural aspect where people simply speak badly about others. But there are some places where people, they tend to be violent. They there is domestic violence and abusing of children in terms of violence, and sometimes so many places we can see. Ultimately the ego have a destructive character. All violence and all pain in the world arises from the existence of the ego. Every painful experience we have and every painful experience we cause come from this unstable, incorrect and unhealthy ego only. Like in Indian Vedic culture, now we'll come to the solution part. Now Shiva is often associated with ego. So he is the symbol of ego's destructive power, and people pray to Lord Shiva to get rid of ego and selfishness and all related problems. So he is considered the most selfless person. He is very generous, merciful and most selfless person. So that's why people go to pilgrimage, they travel to Mount Kailash also in Himalayas, believing that by circumambulating the mountain they can receive a blessings to get rid themselves of ego. And if you see the image of Shiva, you will notice that he is often depicted with snakes wrapped around his body. So these snakes symbolizes the poison we accumulate through ego, our inner turmoil and problem caused by ego. Now Shiva represents the destruction. He is responsible for the process of destruction. So if you know this Vedic culture, there is Brahma for creation, Vishnu for maintenance, Shiva for destruction. So both on the personal level, self-destructive tendency, on a global scale also, wars, conflicts and destructions are actually ultimately cause of pride only, or so ego. Of course that is a manifestation. Now we see there is the dictator of the country, or the person who is ruling the country, they want to control over other places, other people. So that is the cause of war, the conflict. So ultimately all destructive processes, whether internal or external, are root in this very process of ego. And now we'll try to basically what happens is, according to Patanjali definition, who state that ego is when a person confuses the subject of perception with the act of perception. So we discuss this, or the instrument of perception. we also explored some of the consequences of this confusion. So ultimately it leads to the destructive outcomes, including the endless cycle of birth and death. So we are continuously getting destroyed, again we are born, again we are destroyed, death comes, again we are born. This is because of this ego only. So from the perspective of Vedic philosophy, it is the ego and the qualities of our personality that arises from it. So that are the root cause of our continual rebirth. This cycle keeps us in a state of thirst, dissatisfaction and constant searching. The reason for this is the ego. This is the point we are discussing. Like now the important section is we have to understand we will try to understand it more clearly, how the ego is actually manifested in a more gross way. Now this can lead to different outcomes regarding ranging from harmlessness to the highly destructive. Say for example, cosmetics, they are all based on this idea only. I want to appear different from who I really am. If I don't feel the need to project a false image, the entire cosmetic industry would not exist only, right? But since I do not want to look, I want to look different, the industry is flourishing. So this extends all the way to the most negative aspect of the ego, such as the desire to dominate, destroy or harm others. So all of this stems from an unhealthy, unbalanced ego, which can manifest in 4 degrees of severity, causing various degrees of destruction. So we discussed this 4 degrees also, if you remember the previous section. So destruction in both our personal life and in the larger world. Now let us discuss how to treat or address this issue. How can we heal from ego's harmful effects? Now Yoga Sutras, they give a very nice treatment. So according to the different degrees of manifestation, like we will try to see from Vedic culture this perspective, what does modern culture do with the ego, and it is modern civilization cannot exist without ego. It builds upon the ego. Now the pursuit for luxury, wealth and status, now why all these things are needed? Only to feed the ego. The more expensive something is, the more I pay for it, the better I feel. I have a luxury car, luxury some watch or very palatial building or any of the things. If I am staying in a very very sophisticated and or very luxurious hotel, I feel better. Who is feeling better there? The ego is feeling better. So this is all about feeling the ego with unnecessary things. So Vedic civilization on the other hand is based on the opposite principle. As the ego grows, the environment around us becomes more destructive. That is the point. For me to enjoy, I have to give pain to so many people. Like if you see in the Middle Ages, there is slave trade. What is slave trade? You are trying to suppress somebody. This is actually ego. What is imperialism? That is also same thing, ego. You want to control over different lands. And now then there is dictatorship. How it is? It's also same principle. And now what is happening? It is actually corporatization. That is also in one level is a control of ego only. It's actually all these corporate countries, they are trying to create their own empire, expanding over different countries and trying to control in a much subtler way. But that is also actually in one way controlling. So they want to monopolize things. So this is all from where it comes. It's actually it's all ego only. So then the environmental crisis. So like it can be tracked to the individualistic principles, how this environment is getting destroyed, because I want to enjoy. I am trying to ready to destroy all the rainforest. I know I am okay if so many species are getting extinct, and because they don't have any there is ecological balance is lost. Because I want to enjoy, I need to get more and more sophisticated enjoyment, and because of which I am ready to destroy anything which is coming on my way. So this is where this is satisfaction of ego. So more the ego is increasing, the more destruction is happening. That's actually what we see. So like they don't mind damaging the health of others. Like all this fast food, junk food, because these companies, they want to increase their ego, they want to become more and more luxurious or whatever, and they don't mind putting whatever product in the food items and supplying to the people, and people, they get easily caught up with these things. So there is a destruction that is happening. So the individualistic principles upon which our civilization is based, Western culture emphasizes individualism and glorifies the ego. As we move further west, we see more complexity, more saturation, and more pain in the environment, all stemming from this individualism. It's a snowball effect that keeps growing. So what remedies are available for this? So how can we treat this false ego? The first thing that helps to treat the false ego when it manifests in various degrees of severity is respect. At the social level, the principle of respect helps. Respect means acknowledgement, acknowledging other person and saying, I am not the first, you are the first. I know the ego may resist this. Why should I differ? No, I am important, not them. But a healthy culture, this is the first principle that should be emphasized. It's not a trivial thing. It's actually ultimately a spiritual principle. Respect for elders, for those higher in position. If you look at the institution of Vedic culture, we see how deeply these values are ingrained. So from childhood, we teach children that respect is essential, not just for their own growth, but also the well-being of the community. And the second important element of society is gratitude. Now, what is the problem with gratitude? Why it is so hard for a person to genuinely thank other person? The issue is, if someone does something good for me, I feel like they are above me. And this makes the ego uncomfortable. So often the ego will even say, what right do they have to do something good for me? So this reaction is very common. Now, this is not a simple matter. Gratitude is spiritual principle, a law that we must learn and embody in ourselves. In Vedic culture, people are taught they owe debt to the sages, to the elders, to the people who brought them up, and even to animals and the earth. A person is taught that they owe something to everyone, including the cow which nourished them. So this approach helps to form a different kind of ego, one that is more humble, more connected to the world. Ultimately, the result is a person who is happier, more harmonious and peace with themselves, because their ego is not inflated or problematic. More inflammation of ego, more destruction. Right? If you reduce it, we are in a more happy state. Mind is peaceful, we are in a stable state. So the third element, first is respect, gratitude, and third element, which is much more difficult. It is easy to recognize the need for respect and gratitude, but we can see in modern society these values are increasingly neglected, and suffering caused by the ego grows as a result. The real problem of ego, that it causes a person to forget or distance themselves from their true self. Now, the third element, we will try to review before understanding this, we will try to review the 4 degrees of ego manifestation. So the first degree is Shushupti or deep sleep state. The second is Shukshmata, which means a subtle or fine. The third is Shukshma, which means a thin or subtle. And the fourth is Thula, which is more gross, crude. So there are 4, which is it is in a dormant state, and there is a little subtler, more subtler and gross. So these 4 degrees correspond to various level of suffering or challenges caused by ego. Now, Sanskrit texts describe one very important principle in the Yoga Sutras is Kriya Yoga. Like Kriya Yoga consists of 3 components: Tapasya, Swadhyaya and Ishvara Paranidhana. This is very useful. Like Tapasya means asceticism or self-discipline, we can say. So Patanjali Muni states that when the cause of suffering is strongly manifested, when the ego at its most gross or harmful state, the only way to reduce it is tapasya. that is asceticism practices. The more severe the ego manifests, the stronger the remedy must be. The practices that we discussed earlier, respect and gratitude, are softer methods, but tapasya is more harder. Now, then comes the like when it is sukshma, like there are subtle practices, gentle, effective. But in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that asceticism includes speaking words that are pleasant and uplifting also. So, asceticism does not mean standing on one leg. That's an extreme and unnecessary measure for a sick person. True asceticism means consciously placing limits on ourselves, creating boundaries that help control the ego. So, for example, asceticism involves actions like showing respect to elders. This is a physical act of humility, such as bowing to our parents. In Vedic culture, children are taught to bow to their parents every morning as an act of respect. This is considered an ascetic principle for the body. Now, over a time, these small actions built up, creating a more harmonious and peaceful life. If the ego is deceased, it's a more subtle level. It's something harder to detect. So, there may be moments when the ego flares up, causing resentment or anger. This is the poison of ego. But at other times, everything may seem fine. In such cases, the ego is still present, but it is in a more subtle form without an overly pathological manifestation. That means it is there, but it is not coming very grossly. Everybody has, but it don't manifest. So, Patanjali Muni, he actually teaches that the remedy for this is swadhyay, self-study. So, when it is in a more subtle way, you can just study the scriptures. First is you just do some austerities with the body, offer obeisances. But later on you start introspecting. So, swadhyaya means introspection. This means studying oneself, reflecting deeply and applying practices like mantra, repetition of mantras or reading sacred text. Swadhyaya also helps address the subtler manifestation of ego. Is a key practice for our spiritual growth. So, it may be important to discuss why these three principles, the introspection, the study of the holy scriptures and the repetition of mantra, are all referred by the same word which binds them together, that is swadhyaya. And ultimately all of these practices, because they certainly impact our consciousness and help a person get rid of themselves, the problem of deeper and more subtle level. And finally, there is one longer a problem. It has fallen away. It's actually more important problem. We'll try to see. The thing is, we have to surrender. So, that is Ishvara Paranidhana. Because a person engaged in some form of spiritual practice, sadhana or sadhaka, when the inner problem has weakened to that point that it no longer has power over him, but still remains within on a subtle level, it continues to affect us. So, we can see this. For example, in a person who practice yoga, but frequently engaged in that with the desire to show off. This happens, he is trying to show off. You say, he is practicing yoga, but he is having that ego. Because like a person is putting in a scorpion pose, just to impress others. Look, see how capable I am. So, in other words, on the gross level, we can remove ego through various means, simply by living in society and trying to form correct relationship with others. On a more subtle level, we can also reduce the ego through practice like introspection, studying scriptures and repetition of mantra. However, there is one major problem. Even in sadhana, where a person is involved in spiritual practices, a very subtle ego can still persist. So, for example, if someone practices yoga but does show, he shows off, this is there, and it nourishes his ego. He want to show off to others how accomplished I am. So, the ego remains active. They may be doing yoga, but their motive is to be able to tell others, it's clear who am I. You can see my status, my abilities, and to clarify, I forgot to mention that No, ego has two things. It provides, it gives the strength and energy to the ego. Sometimes when it is functioned healthy, it also provides knowledge. There can manifest positively and negatively. So yoga can strengthen the ego also. You become more egoistic by doing it. So there are two sides effects, because the motive should be clear. But so with the proper motive, if you are not doing, then it's dangerous. Now the ego is not completely eradicated. So the problem of ego remains on a very subtle level and can resurface. This leads to the third method. So Patanjali would describe in the Yoga Sutras, what is that? It is Ishvara Pranidhana. It actually means, Pranidhana means surrender. Ishvara means Supreme Lord. So Patanjali Muni says that Ishvara Pranidhana is the fastest way to attain Samadhi, or the highest state of consciousness. Now this is actually working directly on consciousness. Like we discussed that Srimad Bhagavatam says two states of mind: calmness and concentration, strength of concentration. So this is the essence of Samadhi. Like a person in Samadhi, he is able to concentrate and he is very calm. So these two are possible, and that is possible when there is Ishvara Pranidhana and surrendering oneself to God. A healthy, correct ego, unlike a false ego that wants to place itself in front of everyone, always strive to be the first, becomes an integral part of the whole. It recognizes itself as a part, not the whole. In an unhealthy state, the ego seeks itself sufficiency, trying by all means to prove its independence. And then we see, but a healthy ego is one where a person is recognizing themselves as part of the whole, which we truly are. We are not the whole, we are part of the whole. Socially, this means I am part of the family or the community, I serve that community. So why have I gone through why we have discussed all these things? To say that the problem with the ego can only truly be solved at the level of our relationship with Lord. Now that's actually what Patanjali tells us also in Yoga Sutra, and Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita, that whatever other scriptures say is that I can resolve the ego issues completely and correctly only when I understand that I am connected to God. God exists and I must surrender to Him as a part of the whole, not self-sufficient, and I must eventually serve Him. This is actually what is known as Bhakti Yoga. So there are three practices that are described. There is Kriya Yoga, where tapasya or asceticism is there, and second is Swadhyaya, self-study, and the third is Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to God. Now corresponding to three methods, the three paths are there. One is Karma Yoga, you might have heard this, Karma Yoga, and then there is Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, studying of the scriptures, and then third one is Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. All these paths are interconnected. Bhakti Yoga, surrendering oneself and establishing a relation with God, is the only path that truly solves all the problems of ego. This is because in doing so, we recognize that we are part of a greater whole. So Bhakti Yoga is the work with the ego from the beginning to end. So it's an understanding that I am part of the whole, and it involves recognizing my true self in relation to the whole. So this is essentially the goal of yoga, to understand who really I am. So when Patanjali outlines Yoga Sutras, he starts in the first sutra. First sutra says, now I will describe yoga. And the second sutra he says, definition of yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, the cessation or functions of the mind. And the third sutra he says that when the yoga attains samadhi, they return to their original state, Swarupa. So understanding who they are truly, the goal of yoga is the third sutra, like to attain that samadhi. So this is the entire yoga path. So all problems can be solved if we work with ego. The third method, Ishvara Pranidhan, is the most powerful, that is Bhakti Yoga, because it addresses the ego at the highest level and the most subtlest level, eliminating the disease of and the root cause of it. So that is actually the way we can see how we are all having this problem of ego, wrong identification, and the solution for it is, this is the solution according to Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Patanjali Munis. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.